Cops, perfect, call them, but don't be shocked if the person getting handcuffed isn't me. That's all I said when Karen started screaming at 911 about the smart lock I'd just installed on my backyard pool gate. She thought she'd caught me red-handed in some HOA violation. But when the police arrived and I opened my Karen footage folder, everything went dead silent. The cameras showed over 10 times she'd trespassed, bringing guests to throw parties without permission. The property deed, with its official stamp confirming my ownership of the fence area, had the entire police force nodding in agreement. I didn't argue, I didn't explain. I just stood there, watching her sign the citation with hands shaking like autumn leaves. Drop your country in the comments, because this is the most epic call 911 on yourself moment I've ever witnessed. You know that feeling when you're doing everything by the book, but still getting screamed at. I just lived through it, and this was the most expensive lesson I've ever learned. 3 months ago, I inherited my grandmother's house in Maple Grove. One of those suburban neighborhoods where every lawn looks like it was trimmed with a ruler. And the HOA has opinions about everything from mailbox colors to how long you can idle your car in the driveway. I'm Ethan Blackwater, 34, a software engineer who works from home. Up until recently, I thought my biggest problem was deciding whether to sell the house or move in permanently. Turns out I was about to get a crash course in suburban warfare, one that would make Game of Thrones look like a Disney movie. The house came with memories, most of them good. Grandma Rose had lived there for 43 years. Every corner held some piece of family history, but it also came with a backyard pool that needed serious attention and a fence that was falling apart. The smart lock installation seemed like a no-brainer. I'm a tech guy. I believe in security, and after 3 break-ins in the neighborhood last year, I wanted to make sure everything was properly locked down. The pool area was private property, completely mine, extending 10 feet beyond the fence line on all sides. I had every legal right to install whatever I wanted. What I didn't count on was my neighbor's interpretation of property rights. I was just finishing up the installation, testing the app, and making sure the lock engaged properly, when I heard the voice that would haunt my dreams for months. Excuse me, excuse me. It came from behind me like a tornado siren, sharp enough to cut glass and loud enough to wake the dead. I turned to see Margaret Thornfield, early 50s, perfectly styled blonde hair, posture like she'd been preparing for this exact confrontation her entire life. She was holding what looked like a leather-bound manual thick enough to stop a bullet. Her eyes had that specific gleam that retail workers learned to fear during Black Friday. You absolutely cannot install that without HOA approval, she announced, pointing at my smart lock like it was a nuclear warhead. I'm Margaret Thornfield, HOA president, and what you're doing right now is a direct violation of community standards. The way she said it, you'd think I was graffiti, tagging the community center instead of securing my property. I took a deep breath, reminding myself of what Grandma Rose used to say about dealing with difficult people. Kill them with kindness, and if that doesn't work, kill them with documentation. Hi Margaret, I'm Ethan Blackwater. I think there might be some confusion. I replied calmly. This is my private property. According to the survey, the pool area isn't part of any HOA common space. I'm just installing a security lock for peace of mind. I pointed to the visible fence markers. I've got all the paperwork inside if you'd like to see it. For a moment, I thought logic might win. I was young and optimistic back then. Then Margaret pulled out her secret weapon, the HOA Handbook 2024, a book so massive it could be used as a doorstop or a medieval war club. She held it like Moses with the stone tablets, eyes gleaming like she'd discovered cold fusion. Section 4, 7, subsection C, she declared dramatically, flipping through the pages like a prosecutor finding the smoking gun. Any exterior modifications that affect community aesthetics, safety standards, or neighborhood harmony must be submitted for review and approval by the HOA board. This includes, but is not limited to, fencing, lighting, security devices, and any mechanical installations visible from common areas. I'll admit I hesitated, not because I thought she was right, but because I realized I was dealing with someone who had weaponized bureaucracy. This wasn't about safety. This was about control. She had memorized every loophole and subsection that might give her power over people's lives. Standing in my own backyard, phone still in hand with the smart lock app open, I had my first real moment of doubt. Wait, did I miss something? Should I have checked with someone first? But then I remembered the photo on my kitchen counter. Grandma Rose standing by this same pool, her arms around me when I was 12. I could almost hear her voice. Ethan, honey, don't ever let anyone make you doubt yourself when you know you're doing what's right. That memory snapped me back into focus. This wasn't just about a smart lock. It was about protecting what my grandmother had built, honoring her legacy. I appreciate your concern, Margaret, I said with my confidence returning, but I've done my homework. The lock is well within my property line, confirmed by the county survey. I'm not altering any HOA common space or community property. This is purely personal security. I held up my phone. It's just a digital deadbolt, same function as any regular lock, just smarter. Margaret's face changed color, from pink to red to nearly purple. She clutched that handbook like a holy relic and stared at me like she was calculating her next legal strike. This isn't over, she hissed, her voice reaching dog whistle frequency. I'm calling the police. This is a violation of community standards, and I won't let you get away with it. You go ahead and do that, I replied, unknowingly triggering what I would later call World War Karen, 2024 edition. I'll be right here. If calling 911 was an art form, Margaret just performed a full opera, and me, I became the unwilling audience for the performance of a lifetime. 20 minutes after our backyard standoff, I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard her voice through the open window, clear as a stadium speaker. She wasn't just calling 911. She was putting on a Broadway-worthy show. I grabbed my phone and hit record, not because I thought I'd need evidence, but because this was just too absurd not to document. Emergency, this is Margaret Thornfield at 1247 Maple Grove Lane, she announced with the flair of someone reporting a 5-alarm fire. My neighbor is installing unauthorized security devices that violate our HOA lawn maintenance schedule. There was a pause. I could practically hear the confusion in the dispatcher's voice through the phone. Ma'am, did you just say lawn maintenance schedule? Is anyone bleeding or in immediate danger? Margaret's response was pure gold. He's bleeding our community standards dry. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. This woman had just compared a smart lock to a medical emergency. With complete sincerity. The dispatcher, bless their soul, tried to maintain professionalism while clearly questioning their career path. Ma'am, I need to clarify, is this a property dispute or an actual emergency requiring immediate police response? Margaret's voice rose an octave, probably interfering with local radio signals. This is an emergency. He's violating established community protocols. I have documentation. At this point, I was genuinely concerned for her blood pressure, but also fascinated by her commitment to this performance. Part of me wondered if she'd rehearsed this speech in the bathroom mirror. As I listened to this symphony of suburban outrage, my mind started to race with doubt. Wait a minute, what if I did miss something? What if there's some obscure regulation I didn't know about? The anxiety crept in like fog over a harbor. Maybe I should call a lawyer. Maybe I should have checked with someone first. I found myself second, guessing every decision I'd made, wondering if my confidence had been misplaced. This was Margaret's real talent, making reasonable people question their sanity. But then I looked at the stack of legal documents my attorney had given me, the property survey, the deed, the title insurance. Everything clearly showed where my property ended and where HOA jurisdiction began. My smart lock was 15 feet inside my boundary markers on a gate leading to a pool that had been private property since 1981. No amount of dramatic phone calls could change basic property law. I took a deep breath and reminded myself, being loud doesn't make someone right. It just makes them loud. 15 minutes later, I heard the familiar sound of a police cruiser pulling into our shared driveway. Officer Diego Santos stepped out, a man in his 40s with the patient expression of someone who'd seen far too many neighborhood disputes. He looked tired, but not annoyed. More like a teacher dealing with kindergartners who couldn't share toys. Margaret practically sprinted out of her front door, still clutching that massive handbook, ready to present her case like she'd just cracked the crime of the century. "Officer, thank you for coming so quickly," she gushed, positioning herself between him and my property like she was guarding Fort Knox. "This man is violating multiple HOA regulations, and I have documentation proving his actions are illegal under our community charter." She started flipping pages feverishly while Santos listened politely, nodding occasionally and taking notes. I walked over slowly, careful not to appear confrontational. I wanted to hear what was said, but I didn't want to escalate anything. Santos looked at the smart lock, then at Margaret's handbook, then at me, like he was trying to solve a puzzle with pieces from two different boxes. "Ma'am, I appreciate your concern about community standards," he said diplomatically, "but installing a lock on private property isn't typically a criminal matter. If there's a legitimate property dispute, I'll need documentation from both parties." Margaret lit up like Christmas morning. "Documentation? Officer, I have 17 pages of relevant regulations right here." "That's fine, ma'am," he replied, "but I'll also need property deeds and surveys to understand the legal boundaries." Then he turned to me. "Sir, do you have documentation showing your property lines and ownership of this fence area?" This was the moment I'd unknowingly prepared for. "Officer, everything's in my basement filing cabinet. Would you like me to get it?" Margaret's confident expression started to flicker, like a light bulb with loose wiring. She hadn't expected this to turn into a document check. As I headed toward the basement door, I noticed Margaret watching me, her anxiety visibly rising. What she didn't know was that my basement had been converted into something resembling NAS, a mission controlled during my grandmother's final years. After several break-ins, Grandma Rose had installed a 12-camera 4K surveillance system with enough tech to monitor a small space program. When I opened the door and the lights flickered on, both Santos and Margaret froze, staring at the wall of monitors and equipment like they'd stumbled into a CA bunker. "Holy cow," Santos muttered. "How long has this system been running?" he asked. "About 3 months," I replied casually, pulling out the property documents. "My grandmother installed most of it. I upgraded the digital storage when I moved in." Margaret swallowed hard, making a sound like someone choking on regret. Something told me her day was about to get a lot more complicated. You know that feeling when your enemy accidentally hands you the shovel they're going to dig their own grave with. Karen had just handed me a whole construction crew. Santos examined my documents with the thoroughness of someone who'd handled boundary disputes before. Margaret's confidence began to crumble like a cheap phone screen. She kept glancing between the monitors and the basement door, probably wondering just how much of her behavior had been captured in high definition. What she didn't realize was that I'd been hoping someone would ask to see the footage. "These documents look legitimate," Santos said, spreading the survey across my workbench. "You mentioned having cameras running for 3 months. In cases like this, video can clarify usage patterns. Would you mind showing me relevant footage?" Margaret's face went through a full mood ring transformation, from confident pink to ghost white. "Officer," she cut in quickly, "I don't think surveillance footage is necessary for a simple HOA compliance issue." I pulled up my desktop. A folder labeled security footage appeared, neatly organized by month and location. But one folder stood out, Margaret Activity, Officer Santos. I said, clicking it open, "I think you'll find this very interesting." Inside were 47 video files, each time-stamped and dated. Margaret made a sound like a balloon slowly deflating. The first video showed her unlocking my old gate with a key and leading 6 people into my pool area for a casual barbecue. The timestamp, July 15th, 2:30 p.m. Margaret wore a yellow sundress and carried what looked like a casserole dish. They brought tables, grills, and treated my backyard like it was a public park. "Ma'am," Santos asked carefully, "can you explain why you're unlocking this gate? That was a community event." Margaret snapped, her voice now at bat-level frequencies. "The HOA has established usage rights for common areas under Section 8. 4 of our charter. We've been organizing gatherings for years. She was waving that handbook again like it contained the secrets of the universe. These pool parties bring our community together. They're essential for maintaining neighborhood bonds and property values. The desperation in her voice was starting to sound like a late-night infomercial for a product nobody wanted. Santos looked at me with raised eyebrows. Is this area considered common property according to your deed? I spread out the official property survey map, pointing to the boundary lines clearly highlighted in yellow by surveyor's ink. Officer, according to this county verified survey, my property extends 10 feet beyond the fence line in all directions. The pool and surrounding area are 100% private property, not HOA common space. I traced the lines with my finger while Santos followed along, noting the official stamps and signatures from the county recorder's office to eliminate any confusion. Santos pulled out his radio and contacted the county clerk's office directly. This is Officer Santos, badge number 447. I need verification on property boundaries for 1,247 Maple Grove Lane. Can someone pull the official records and confirm the legal description? While we waited for a response, Margaret stood there like a robot that had just run out of battery power. If there were a sound effect for the collapse of delusional thinking, it would be the noise a balloon makes when someone lets all the air out at once. Officer Santos, this is county records, came the response through the radio static. Property 1,247 Maple Grove Lane shows private ownership extending to the surveyed boundaries marked on the official plat map. No common areas or easements are recorded within the highlighted property lines. All improvements, including pool, fencing, and structures, are within private property boundaries. Santos looked at Margaret with the expression of someone who just watched a magic trick get explained. Ma'am, it appears this pool area is entirely private property. Margaret's defense strategy shifted faster than a politician during election season. Well, even if it's technically private property, we've had an understanding with the previous owner for years. Mrs. Blackwater never objected to our community events. We've been using this space with implied permission. She was grasping at legal straws like someone trying to build a raft out of toothpicks. This is about community spirit, officer. This is about maintaining the neighborhood relationships that make our area special. That's interesting, Santos replied, scribbling in his notepad. Sir, were you aware of any arrangements between your grandmother and the HOA regarding pool usage? I shook my head slowly, remembering all the conversations I'd had with Grandma Rose about protecting the property. Officer, my grandmother never mentioned any such arrangement. In fact, she specifically told me to keep the property secure and private. That's why she installed the security system in the first place. The irony wasn't lost on me. Margaret's entire defense rested on the alleged approval of someone who had installed 12 security cameras to prevent this exact behavior. Santos looked back at the paused video, still showing Margaret's barbecue party in full swing. Ma'am, when was the most recent time you used this pool area? Margaret hesitated for a few seconds too long. It's been a while, I don't remember exactly. I clicked on the most recent video file, dated just 2 days earlier. Officer, this might refresh your memory. The video began playing, showing Margaret unlocking the gate and leading what looked like a small parade of 20 people into my backyard for what appeared to be a full-scale pool party, complete with inflatable unicorns. Number, Margaret whispered, watching herself on screen organizing what was possibly the most elaborate unauthorized pool party in suburban history. That can't be right. If throwing parties at someone else's house were an art form, Margaret was the Picasso of trespassing. The video played on my monitor like a nature documentary about suburban wildlife, except this wildlife was wearing swimsuits and drinking margaritas in my backyard without permission. Margaret stood frozen, watching herself direct what looked like a full-blown block party complete with a DJ setup, multiple grills, and enough pool floats to supply a resort. The timestamp read 2:00 p.m. 28:00 p.m. 6 solid hours of unauthorized entertainment on private property. Ma'am, Santos said, keeping his tone professional but clearly amazed. This appears to be quite an elaborate event. On screen, we watched her directing traffic like a seasoned event planner, pointing guests toward the pool, telling them where to set up chairs, and even collecting what appeared to be cash from several attendees. Can you explain why you have a key to this gentleman's gate, and why you're organizing events on his private property? Margaret's mouth opened and closed several times like a fish trying to breathe air. Before she could come up with another creative defense, the doorbell rang. A familiar voice called out, "Ethan, dear, is everything all right? I saw the police car. Mrs. Beverly Chen, my 78-year-old neighbor from across the street, appeared at the top of the basement stairs, looking concerned but also curious. She'd been Grandma Rose's closest friend and had kept a watchful eye on me since I moved in. "Mrs. Chen," I called, "would you mind coming down for a moment? Officer Santos might want to ask you a few questions." Mrs. Chen carefully descended the stairs, her eyes scanning the surveillance setup like someone who truly appreciated good security. When she saw Margaret standing there, looking like a kid caught cheating on a test, her face shifted to a mix of disappointment and inevitability. "Oh, Margaret," she sighed, like a grandmother catching a toddler with their hand in the cookie jar. "I was wondering when this would catch up with you." Santos looked between them with renewed interest. "Ma'am, have you witnessed any of these pool activities?" "Officer, I've been watching this nonsense for months." Mrs. Chen replied, settling into a folding chair. "I called Margaret 3 separate times asking whether Ethan had given permission for these parties." "And what did she say?" Santos asked. "She said, of course he has. I'm the HOA president, and I have full authority to coordinate community events." Margaret's face shifted through multiple shades of red as Mrs. Chen continued. "I thought it was strange Ethan never mentioned hosting parties, but Margaret was so confident that I assumed there was some arrangement." Santos was writing furiously in his notebook, occasionally glancing at the paused footage. On screen, Margaret could be seen setting up what appeared to be a payment station near the gate. "Mrs. Chen," he asked, "did you witness any financial transactions during these events?" "Oh, yes." She nodded firmly. Margaret was charging people $15 per person for HOA premium pool access. She had a little cash box and everything. Very professional setup, I must admit. I paused the video at a frame showing Margaret clearly collecting cash from a man in swim trunks. "Officer," I said, "if you look closely here, you can see the cash exchange happening right at my gate." The evidence was becoming so overwhelming that I almost felt sorry for Margaret. Almost. She was standing there like a smartphone that had just been bricked, completely unresponsive to the reality unfolding around her. "Margaret," Santos said gently, "charging admission to someone else's private property without their permission is a serious matter." Margaret's latest defense strategy emerged with the desperation of someone trying to stop a sinking ship with a coffee cup. These were community building events. I was fostering neighborhood relationships. The money was just to cover expenses like cleaning supplies and refreshments. She gestured wildly at the monitor. "Look how happy everyone is. Look at the community spirit. This is what makes neighborhoods thrive." Her voice had reached a pitch that probably registered on seismographs in neighboring counties. Santos looked at me with the expression of someone trying to solve a puzzle where the pieces kept multiplying. "Sir, do you have any record of authorizing these events or receiving any of the money collected?" I shook my head while pulling up my security system's main interface. "Officer, not only did I never authorize these parties, but I wasn't even aware they were happening until I started reviewing the footage last week. I've been working from home most days, but my office is on the front side of the house. I had no idea my backyard was being turned into a commercial entertainment venue." The footage continued playing, showing Margaret's operation in full swing. People were diving into my pool, using my outdoor furniture, running my pool equipment, and treating the space like their personal resort. One particularly telling moment showed Margaret giving what appeared to be a guided tour to newcomers, pointing out different amenities and explaining pool rules like she owned the place. "My electricity bill has been unusually high the past few months," I mentioned to Santos. "Now I'm understanding why." Santos closed his notepad and looked at Margaret with the expression of someone who just finished a particularly complicated math problem. "Ma'am, we need to discuss how many times this has occurred, sir." He turned to me. "How many video files did you say were in that folder?" I glanced at my computer screen where the folder contents were still visible. 40. 7 separate incidents over the past 3 months, I replied. Margaret made a sound like a balloon animal being twisted into an impossible shape. Mrs. Chen shook her head sadly. "Margaret, what were you thinking?" 47 times, Santos repeated, his eyebrows reaching his hairline. "Ma'am, we're going to need to have a very serious conversation about trespassing, unauthorized business operations, and fraud." Margaret's confident facade finally crumbled completely. She looked around the basement like someone searching for an exit that didn't exist. "This is impossible," she whispered. "There must be some mistake." But the evidence was staring her in the face from multiple camera angles, time-stamped and dated with digital precision. Her pool party empire was collapsing faster than a house of cards in a tornado. 47 instances of breaking and entering. For anyone else, that would be called a criminal enterprise. For Margaret, that was just building community connections. Officer Santos was now scrolling through my security footage like he was binge watching the most unbelievable reality show ever produced. And Margaret was standing there like a defendant watching their alibis get demolished one by one. What started as a simple complaint about a smart lock had transformed into something that would make federal prosecutors salivate. I almost felt bad for her, almost. The video montage was like watching the rise and fall of a suburban empire. There were pool parties with full barbecue setups, yoga classes conducted on my pool deck, book clubs meeting around my patio furniture, dog training sessions using my backyard as an obstacle course, and what appeared to be several children's birthday parties complete with bounce houses and clowns. Margaret had essentially turned my private property into a commercial recreation center, and she'd been charging admission the entire time. "Ma'am," Santos said, pausing on a video showing Margaret collecting money from a line of people, "can you explain this fee structure?" Margaret's defense had evolved from confident to desperate to something approaching delusional. "Officer, these small contributions were just to cover maintenance cost, pool chemicals, cleaning supplies, wear and tear on the facilities," she insisted. She gestured toward my pool like she was a facilities manager explaining operational expenses. "I was saving Mr. Blackwater money by maintaining his property while he was busy with work." The logic was so twisted, it could have been used to teach advanced pretzel-making techniques. Santos pulled out his cell phone and made a call that would change everything. "This is Officer Santos, badge 447. I need to verify the current HOA board status for the Maple Grove Community Association. Specifically, I need to confirm whether Margaret Thornfield is currently serving as president." There was a pause while he listened to the response, and I watched Margaret's face go through emotional stages like someone watching their life flash before their eyes. "I see. And when did her term officially end?" 6 months ago. "Has anyone been elected to replace her?" The truth hit Margaret like a freight train made of legal documents. She hadn't been HOA president for 6 months, having lost her re-election bid in what I later learned was a landslide defeat. But she'd continued using the title, continued organizing events, continued collecting money, and continued acting like she had authority she no longer possessed. "Ma'am," Santos said, closing his phone. "According to HOA corporate records, you haven't been president since January. Your term ended and you weren't re-elected. Yet you've been conducting business using a title you no longer hold." This revelation transformed Margaret from a pushy neighbor into something much more serious. A fake HOA president, organizing fake events, and collecting real money from unsuspecting neighbors. The implications were staggering: tax evasion, fraud, misrepresentation, unauthorized business operations, and now 47 counts of trespassing. Mrs. Chen gasped audibly. "Margaret, you told everyone you were still president. You've been collecting money under false pretenses." Margaret looked around the basement like someone searching for a reality where her life hadn't just imploded. Santos was now in full law enforcement mode, his notepad filled with what looked like enough violations to keep a prosecutor busy for months. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come upstairs so we can discuss this situation properly." He began reciting the words that made Margaret's face drain of all remaining color. "You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can and will be used against you in a court of law." The Miranda rights echoed through my basement like a funeral dirge for Margaret's suburban dictatorship. "This can't be happening," Margaret shrieked, her voice reaching frequencies that probably shattered wine glasses in 3 neighboring houses. "I have rights, I have documentation. I'll call my lawyer. I know people. This is harassment." She was clutching that HOA handbook like a security blanket, but it couldn't protect her from the weight of 47 felony charges, backed by high-definition video evidence. Her empire of fake authority was crumbling faster than a sandcastle at high tide. As Santos escorted Margaret upstairs to complete the paperwork, I could hear her continuing to protest her innocence with the dedication of someone who'd convinced themselves that repeating a lie enough times would make it true. I was helping the community, I was building relationships, I was providing valuable services. Each excuse sounded more hollow than the last, echoing through my house like the last gasps of a deflating balloon. The citation process was almost anticlimactic after everything that had led up to it. Margaret sat at my kitchen table, hands shaking like autumn leaves in a windstorm, as Santos explained each charge: violation, trespassing, fraud, misrepresentation, unauthorized business operations, and potential tax evasion. The pen trembled in her grip as she signed document after document, each signature sealing her fate a little more completely. The woman who'd started the day thinking she was enforcing community standards was ending it facing potential prison time. Mrs. Chen patted my shoulder as we watched the proceedings. "Your grandmother would be proud, dear. She always said the truth has a way of coming out eventually." I nodded, thinking about how Grandma Rose's security system had been the key to unraveling Margaret's entire operation. Sometimes, justice comes from the most unexpected places, delivered through the lens of a 4K security camera and the patience of a good police officer. As Santos prepared to escort Margaret to his car, he turned to me with the expression of someone who just solved a particularly complex puzzle. "Sir, there's one more thing we need to discuss. Given the extent of the violations and the financial damages involved, you have the option to press formal charges. This could result in significant jail time for Miss Thornfield. Do you want to pursue criminal prosecution?" The question hung in the air like smoke from an extinguished fire, and suddenly, the weight of Margaret's future was in my hands. Revenge is a dish best served cold, but that day, I learned that mercy might be the ultimate power move. Standing in my kitchen with Officer Santos waiting for my answer, I had 60 seconds to decide whether Margaret Thornfield would spend the next 2 to 5 years in prison. The charges were serious enough to destroy her life completely: 47 counts of trespassing, fraud, misrepresentation, unauthorized business operations, and potential tax evasion. One word from me, and she'd go from suburban queen to federal inmate. The irony wasn't lost on me that the woman who had called 911 to report my violation was now completely at my mercy. Margaret sat at my kitchen table, looking like someone who just watched their entire world collapse in slow motion. Her hands were still trembling as she stared at the stack of citations Santos had just served her, each one representing a different way her fake empire had violated actual laws. The HOA handbook that had been her weapon of choice was now sitting uselessly beside her, as relevant to her current situation as a paper airplane in a hurricane. "Please," she whispered, looking up at me with eyes that held none of the arrogance from 3 hours earlier. I never meant for any of this to happen. That's when my mind went back to a conversation I'd had with Grandma Rose just 2 months before she passed away. We'd been sitting on her front porch, watching the sunset paint the neighborhood in golden light. And she'd told me something that stuck with me. "Ethan, honey, kindness is strength, not weakness. The strongest people I've ever known were the ones who chose mercy when they had every right to choose revenge. That's what separates good people from broken people." At the time, I thought she was talking about forgiveness in general. I never imagined I'd be testing that philosophy with someone who'd been systematically robbing me for months. Santos was still waiting for my answer, his pen poised over the paperwork that would officially transform this from a civil dispute into a criminal case. Margaret looked like she was holding her breath, probably calculating how many years she might serve and what it would mean for her already fractured relationship with her daughter. That's when the dam broke and the real Margaret Thornfield finally emerged from behind the armor of fake authority and community position. "I lost everything," she said, her voice cracking like ice under pressure. "My husband left me 8 months ago, took our daughter, and I haven't seen Sophia in weeks because she doesn't want to visit someone who can't stop trying to control everyone's life." Tears started rolling down her cheeks as the whole story poured out. "I organized these pool parties because I thought if I could create this perfect community, this ideal neighborhood where everyone was happy and connected, maybe she'd want to come back. Maybe she'd see that I was building something good instead of just being the angry woman who ruined her parents' marriage." The psychological picture was becoming clearer and more heartbreaking with every word. Margaret hadn't been a villain. She'd been a broken woman trying to build a fantasy world where she could feel valuable and needed again. The HOA presidency had given her identity and purpose, and when she lost the election, she'd simply continued living in a reality where she still mattered. I kept telling myself that the money was just for expenses, that I was providing a service, that everyone was happier because of what I was doing, she continued, but the truth is, I was terrified of becoming invisible, of admitting that nobody wanted me in charge anymore. Mrs. Chen, who'd been listening quietly from the corner, spoke up with the wisdom of someone who'd seen decades of human drama. "Margaret, dear, you don't build community by taking what isn't yours. You build it by giving what you have." Her words hung in the air like a gentle rebuke, not cruel, but honest in the way that only elderly neighbors can deliver. Sophia doesn't need a perfect neighborhood. She needs a mother who knows the difference between helping and controlling. The 60 seconds Santos had given me felt like 60 hours as I wrestled with what felt like the most important decision of my adult life. On one hand, Margaret had systematically violated my property, stolen my utilities, charged people money to access my private space, and done it all while lying about her authority. Justice demanded consequences. On the other hand, destroying someone who was already destroying themselves felt less like justice and more like cruelty. Grandma Rosa's voice echoed in my memory. "Choose mercy when you have every right to choose revenge." "Officer Santos," I said finally, my voice steadier than I felt, "I'm not going to press criminal charges." Margaret's sob of relief was audible across the room. "But," I continued, looking directly at her, "there are conditions. You pay back every penny of the utility cost, estimated at $3,000. You write a formal apology to the entire HOA community explaining what you did and why. You return all money collected from the unauthorized events, and you get professional help, because what happened here isn't normal behavior, and Sophia deserves better than a mother who thinks controlling others equals caring for them." Margaret nodded frantically, agreeing to every condition like someone accepting a life preserver. "Yes, absolutely, whatever you want. Thank you so much." Santos looked at me with something that might have been respect. "Sir, that's very generous of you." But then he added something that changed the entire dynamic again. "However, I should mention that while you're choosing not to press charges, the IRS and HOA corporate headquarters will likely conduct their investigations into the unauthorized business operations and potential tax evasion. Your mercy doesn't necessarily protect her from federal consequences." The weight of that revelation settled over Margaret like a heavy blanket. Even my forgiveness couldn't protect her from the larger machinery of law, enforcement, and taxation that had been triggered by her actions. She had avoided immediate criminal prosecution, but her troubles were far from over. The look on her face told me she understood this was just the beginning of a very long journey toward making things right. Sometimes mercy isn't about eliminating consequences. It's about giving someone a chance to face those consequences with dignity and support instead of destruction and isolation. As we finished the paperwork and Santos prepared to leave, I realized that choosing mercy hadn't made me weak. It had made me feel more like the man my grandmother had raised me to be. "This isn't over," Santos warned Margaret gently. but you've been given a chance to handle it right. Don't waste it. 2 weeks later, a FedEx envelope would arrive that would prove mercy sometimes creates miracles that revenge never could. If you think the story ended with Margaret signing citations, you've seriously underestimated the plot armor of suburban drama. 2 weeks after Officer Santos left my house with Margaret in tow, I was working from home when the FedEx truck pulled up to my driveway like it was delivering state secrets. The driver handed me an overnight envelope that felt heavier than it should have, addressed in handwriting so careful it looked like someone had practiced each letter multiple times. Inside was a cashier's check for exactly $3,247, covering every penny of my utility bills, estimated damages, and even interest I hadn't asked for. But the money wasn't what made me sit down hard in my kitchen chair. Attached to the check was a handwritten letter on cream-colored stationery, the kind people use for important occasions, and a photograph that told a story I hadn't expected. The photo showed Margaret and a teenage girl who had to be Sophia. Both were sitting in what looked like a therapist's office, smiling, genuine smiles that reached their eyes. They were holding hands across a small table, and you could see hope in their faces, the kind that comes from starting to rebuild something that was broken. Dear Ethan, the letter began in Margaret's careful handwriting. I know an apology can't undo 3 months of violating your property and trust, but I need you to know that your mercy saved more than just my legal future. It saved my relationship with my daughter. The letter went on to explain that Sophia had watched the entire incident unfold through neighborhood gossip and social media posts from other teenagers. Instead of being embarrassed by her mother's breakdown, Sophia had been impressed that someone had shown Margaret kindness when they could have chosen destruction. Margaret had enrolled in anger management therapy and was seeing a counselor who specialized in control issues and grief counseling. The sessions weren't easy, but they were helping her understand that losing her marriage and HOA position had triggered a psychological spiral that made her try to control everything around her as a way of feeling stable. Sophia told me something that broke my heart and opened my eyes, Margaret wrote. She said, "Mom, I don't need you to control the neighborhood. I need you to control yourself." Your decision to show mercy instead of revenge taught her that strong people choose healing over hurting. The real plot twist came in the letter's final paragraphs, where Margaret revealed something that Mrs. Chen had hinted at but never fully explained. "Ethan, I need to tell you something about your grandmother that might change how you see this whole situation. Mrs. Chen finally told me the truth about the pool usage over the years. Your grandmother knew about the informal neighborhood gatherings. She knew about the previous homeowner arrangement, and she never said anything because she believed good neighbors share what they can when they can. This revelation hit me like a freight train carrying emotional cargo." According to Margaret's letter, Grandma Rose had been aware of the casual pool usage for years, but had chosen not to mention it to me because she wanted me to make my own decisions about the property. She'd installed the security system not to catch trespassers, but to ensure that if sharing happened, it happened safely and respectfully. Your grandmother told Mrs. Chen that she hoped whoever inherited the house would find the balance between protecting what's theirs and sharing what brings people joy. Margaret's letter concluded with something that fundamentally changed my understanding of the entire situation. I perverted that spirit of sharing by turning it into a business and lying about my authority. But your grandmother's wisdom about community and your decision to choose mercy over revenge have shown Sophia and me what real leadership looks like. Thank you for teaching us the difference between authority and respect. The letter was signed simply, Margaret Thornfield, neighbor and grateful mother. That afternoon, I made a decision that would have made Grandma Rose proud. I kept the smart lock, but programmed 3 additional access codes, one for Mrs. Chen, one for the current HOA president properly elected this time, and one for genuine community emergencies. I drafted a simple agreement. Any neighbor could use the pool area for small gatherings with 48 hours advance notice and a commitment to clean up afterward. No money, no fake authority, just neighbors being neighborly, within clear boundaries. 3 days later, Margaret sent me a Facebook friend request with a message that made me smile. "Thank you for teaching me the difference between authority and respect. Sophia wants to meet the man who showed her mom what real strength looks like. I accepted the request, and her first public post was a photo of her and Sophia volunteering at a local food bank with the caption, "Learning that real community service means giving, not taking. Proud of my daughter for teaching me to be better." The smart lock still works perfectly, monitoring and securing my property exactly as intended. Margaret now has a legitimate access code and uses it responsibly, about once a month for small family gatherings with Sophia, always with advanced permission and always leaving the area cleaner than she found it. The last time I checked my security footage, I saw her collecting leaves from the pool filter without being asked. A small act that spoke volumes about character development. Unlocked. Mrs. Chen stopped by last week with homemade cookies and an update on Margaret's progress. "Your grandmother always said that mercy was the strongest force in the universe. She told me, settling into my porch chair like she'd done it 1,000 times, she'd be proud of how you handled everything. You gave Margaret a chance to become the person Sophia needed her to be." Sometimes, justice isn't about punishment. It's about giving people the opportunity to choose who they want to become when they think nobody's watching. The neighborhood has returned to its normal rhythm of lawn mowing schedules and mailbox color discussions. But something fundamental has changed. There's a sense that problems can be solved with conversation and respect, instead of handbooks and citations. Margaret still walks her dog past my house every evening, and we wave to each other like neighbors do. She's building real community now, one genuine relationship at a time, and Sophia comes to visit every other weekend, swimming in a pool that's shared the right way. Have you ever faced a situation where showing mercy changed everything? Or maybe you've been the one who needed a second chance? Share your story in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today. If this story touched your heart, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to Stories for more tales of hope, redemption, and the power of human kindness. Share it with someone who believes that good people can choose to be better, even in their darkest moments.